Shabbat Shalom. This week's Parsha is Parshas Chayei Sara. And in it, of course, we have the death of Sarah. Abraham buys a field to bury her. Then Abraham sends Eliezer, his servant, to go find a wife for Yitzchak. And on the way back, obviously he's found Rivka. On the way back, Eliezer and Rivka are coming, and Rivka sees Yitzchak from afar, and he is wandering in the field. And the Torah tells us that Yitzchak has come from a place called Be'er Lachai. Why does the Torah bother to tell us where Yitzchak has just come from? So Rashi is bothered by this, and Rashi says, what's Be'er Lachai? Where was it mentioned before in the Torah? When Hagar became pregnant and Sara kicked her out of the house, an angel finds her out in the desert and saves her and tells her that she's going to have a child and she should name him Yishmael. And that place, Hagar names Be'er Lachai. And she names it that because God has seen her. It has to do with being seen. And perhaps in contrast to her, not feeling seen by Sara. And but interestingly, the child is named after hearing. Yishmael, God has heard her. And if you think about it, it's a fascinating idea. I mean, Sarah has just died, right? Hagar had been exiled once and then with Yishmael again, not to come back to the home. Abraham has Yitzchak, he buries Sarah, and now Yitzchak goes and finds Hagar to bring back to Abraham, Abraham's first wife, who was essentially exiled from Abraham's house. What must it mean to Abraham, the idea of taking back Hagar? It's a fascinating idea. It's Yitzchak who brings her back, according to Rashi, to Abraham. I think part of the idea is that Abraham is a master of keeping doors open, of being able to not cut things off, of being able to hold dissonant ideas and feelings all together. For instance, he's told to take his son and kill him and bring him up on an altar. And Abraham does that. He brings his child and he's ready to kill him, and now the angel says, no, don't do it. And what happens? Abraham doesn't do it. And in theory, Abraham goes on with his relationship with Yitzchak. We see that they interact after that. In other words, Abraham is able to both, Kierkegaard points this out in his book on the Akedah, he is able to what does it mean to kill one's child? It means you have to sort of sever internally that relationship. And yet, Abraham is also able to keep it open and change on a dime. Hagar is exiled. Hagar is the one who does not give birth to the progeny of Abraham. And yet, at least according to the Midrash and Rashi, Yitzchak brings her back, and Abraham now marries Hagar. It's an incredible flexibility that Abraham has. There's another Midrash, I think, that really shows this in a great light also. The Midrash says that Abraham goes to find Yishmael. And he comes upon a tent, and he sees Yishmael's wife there. And Yishmael says, "Where's your husband?" Yishmael's wife doesn't know who Abraham is, and she says, "Oh, he's hunting." And she doesn't offer him any bread and water, and she's lacking in that midah, that characteristic that Abraham so much stood for. And so Abraham says to her, "Tell your husband when he comes back, what happened? That somebody came, and you weren't able to give them any bread and water, and something's wrong with the peg of his tent that obviously represents his wife." And the Midrash says that Yishmael divorces her and marries another woman. And Abraham comes back another time. And this woman offers him bread and water. And Yishmael's not there. He's also out hunting. And Abraham says to her in the Midrash, "Tell your husband that an old man came by from the territory of the Philistines." That's where Abraham was living. And he said, "Your tent peg is very good." But it's a fascinating idea that why is Abraham wandering out in the desert to go and find Yishmael? Of course, it's because he loves Yishmael. He never wanted to exile Yishmael from the beginning. He's the one who says to God, "Lu Yishmael yichyeh lefanecha." If only Ishmael would live before you. He wants Yishmael to be his progeny. But Yitzchak ends up becoming his progeny. And so on some level, you would imagine that in order to tolerate that, in order to exist in that way, Abraham would have to expunge the love of Yishmael from him. But he doesn't. After that story is over, eventually Abraham goes out into the desert and looks for Yishmael. And so I think there's a great lesson here. We sometimes, it's very, very hard for us to live on more than one path. We go down a path we change and we become a certain kind of person, take a certain kind of job, and sometimes it changes us because we have to cut off certain parts of ourselves. But I think Avram teaches us that that's not true, that we can retain all these different parts of ourselves, even having to exile a child, having to be, in theory, ready to kill a child, but yet not cut off our hearts from that, still keep our hearts open to all of the possibilities. Shabbat Shalom.